What is up, everybody? Look, this is your act and lead crew, right? So your act and lead management consulting group. Look, I got my good friends here. I got the system master. I got the master of the process. My man Tyrus, right? I got Master Chief Aisha with the stats, right? And of course, I got little old me over here that's just gonna do some talking.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
but check this out. So I appreciate y'all joining us again. Last week we talked about the Ellen Show. We're gonna bring you back more Ellen Show this week, and we're gonna talk about the diversity and inclusion side, right? So last week we talked about, what was going on with the barriers were, kind of some findings that happened, but we wanted to really dive down today into what the diversity side looks like, right? So without further ado, I want to hop into it, right? So I gave you a little background about it. I just want to ask y'all the question, just out the gate, right? Let's get to it. What so we talked about the leadership group, we talked about the Warner Management Group, we talked about who comprised Warner Management, and it was like one person that kind of went into a diverse background, right? So let's start it. I want to start out the question with, what does that mean as far as like the findings in that investigation? What um what are your thoughts on what that's comprised of, right? We talked about it a little bit last week, but what do you think about the composition of what that leadership group means for diversity, inclusion, and equity? I want to shoot this toward Aisha first because she's our resident diversity
Hmm.
officer on here.
Yeah, so I like to just set a foundation, right? Because I want to explain the different or the definitions of each one. Because yes, you probably have heard diversity so much, you've heard equity so much, inclusion, but what does that actually look like? So diversity are the faces. So normally that is mimicking a room, a society, I mean, mimicking a space that mimics society. So, if you go like New York, they always talk about how diverse New York is. So if you go to New York, you see people from all backgrounds all over the place. So a workplace that is diverse is mimicking society. What does that look like? Different races, different backgrounds, different sexual orientations, all of that. So that's a diverse space. The next tier is inclusion. That is my voice being heard? Am I allowed to provide an opinion, and is it open? Like, is that something that people are searching for? So for instance, one of the companies that I just love is Salesforce. Mark Benioff has created a space where 30% of all his meetings have to be women. Why? Because he knows that that is the population, that is the minority group in his organizations. So he set a standard way back that said, listen, my meetings have to be 30% represented by women because I need to hear their voice. I need to hear their opinion. They need to be included in the conversation. So when you think about inclusion, am I included in the conversation? Is my opinion, my opinion vetted? Do they want it? And does it influence any change? And now the tier that is like the most important that a lot of companies are lacking is equity. Do I have a seat at the table? Yeah, you open the door for me. I can come in and we can chit chat for like a hot second. But then at one point the door gets closed and I have to leave. And then the decision makers in the room are the ones that really shape and move your companies. So when you're talking about equity now, do I have a table at the seat, like the table at the seat? Do I have a seat at the table? Can I actually be a part of that decision making process in the company? And I think what a lot of companies are lacking is that you're seeing between the mid-tier management and then once you get to the C-suite, the executive teams, that there is a lack of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So for instance, if we look back on Ellen and we look at Warner Media is made of majority of Caucasian. The other aspect is typically white males. And
Hmm.
then if you get into the Ellen, their core leadership group is predominantly white. And then you have two women now because three of the gentlemen were fired because of this discriminatory and these investigations that happened. And now it's two white women and you have three white males. And now what they've done is, okay, they have their solution is the DJ Twitch. I believe it's Twitch was his name. They have now give him a leadership role. So now he's within that executive tier. So yes, great. You have someone now that's included that is of the African American community, but that's what's missing in a lot of companies. If you really look at the makeup of a lot of your organizations out there, your companies, some reason there is a breakdown between the mid-tier, middle management, and now when we're crossing over the threshold of getting to the executive space, you're seeing a big gap in having diversity, inclusion, and equity all in that one room. And it's so important that we have that. So that is the breakdown. And that was one of the things that people mentioned, and there were some people who mentioned that there was some like institutional or some systematic racism. Essentially, the entire employees that were investigated didn't feel that there was racism throughout the whole organization, but there's still a gap when you're seeing that within this first tier, this mid-tier, you're seeing all these diverse faces. We're having maybe some inclusion at that level, but once we get to the executive team, the people who truly make those decisions of the company and how it moves, you're seeing that it lacks diversity, inclusion, and equity. And that's the fix. We need to focus more on inclusion and definitely equity, because a lot of companies are affected by that.
That's really good. And when I think about this, every time something happens in an organization and these companies do their shakeups, then you have someone or some kind of way a seat at the table opens up. If we think about Papa John's, and I know we're talking about Ellen, but I think about Papa John's, Shaq ended up coming to the table, getting an investment or getting pieces of the company so he can bring that diversity. So when we look at Ellen's show, of course, it's female led, primarily it's her, but the inner workings, I'm trying to think to myself, does she really have a seat at the table? How much control does she really have? Because it's produced and owned by upper echelon. When or how, Aisha, you might can speak to this, how do we start to bring diversity, inclusion, and equity into companies? What does that look like? What does it mean to have a seat at the table? And even if that seat is open, how can we ensure that it's fair? How can we ensure that? Because when I think about it, I still think to the board of advisors. It's 10 people on the table. You got to have a consensus, but I don't know if it has to be everybody. So even if you get one seat, do you still even have an opinion? Will it still be heard?
Yeah, that's really powerful, because like even if you do have one seat, I remember seeing this one. It was like a picture of a woman. She was at a interview, and it was like all male dominated in the room, and she's like, so one person was like, I think one of the questions that they asked was, okay, so what makes you an asset to the team? But it's just the fact that she was in a room with a population that was only white male, that it's like the uncomfortability of it. And you have a great point, because even though I might be, yes, you have a female on the board or African American on the board, the majority of that team or those decision makers do look one way. And does that person still have a voice? And I think it'll be essentially up to that CEO, that person at the top tier. It'll really be from the top down. So I had a situation that happened recently where I was, talking to someone at an organization, and I had to remind them that you have to have buy-in from the top, because you might be gung-ho at your executive level to make changes, but you have to make sure that even at the top tier that your CEO is on board. So when things don't happen, who's going to hold them accountable? Who's going to say, no, this is coming from the CEO. The CEO wants it to be done this way. Our executive team wants it done this way. Now we're trickling down to that middle management, to the first tier. And now it is a precedence. It's something that's within the organization that's now creating a culture of change. And I think that a lot of organizations have to start from the top down. You have to make a lot of changes with your recruiting, with your retention habits, internal and external means, even to your website. I mean, Corey made some great notes for a soon-to-be client of ours, and even assessing their website. Your website doesn't even show inclusivity. You might have the messaging out there, but there's nothing on there that really shows that you're about this life. So if you're truly about this life, it is really changing things from the top down. It's really going into your processes and really identifying the weeds of the issues. Again, Mark Benioff did that effectively. He spent $6 million to fix the pay gap between women. He hired a diversity and inclusion officer now in 2020, has even now recognized that even in 2020, we're still evolving. So now he has a role to start looking into the recruiting measures, because even in the way that companies recruit, they're recruiting from certain schools. But the reality is that school is predominantly white. It only has one type of, or people from a different type of social economic class. You're only referring people. Most people might only hang out with people from a certain background. So now you're only getting referrals from other individuals that might be white as well. So what are you doing to really create a space where maybe you can start placing opportunities at HBCUs? Maybe you can start creating opportunities where let's really look at these job ads and identify if there's any bias. Do we really know that, hey, you say you want this person to have a certain certificate, but this certificate, if you look into the demographics of it, it's majority of people who can even afford or even have this certificate might look a certain way as well. So companies really have to go into the weeds of their processes, all the things that they do to really make an institutional shift. Because again, even though Ellen, they determined that there wasn't any systematic racism, why is it that your executive team, why is it that Warner Media only looks one way? There's still a huge gap and that still needs to be fixed.
Hey, check this out. Check this out. I don't want you to skip over this part, right? So I know you didn't mean to say this, but you said, how do we bring the table to the seat, right? And I know that's not what you meant by that, but I don't want to skip over that because when people feel important, right? We talked about this before. Start with the employees, right? When people feel important, when people feel heard, if you go to a company, and we've been there before, right? If you go to a company that it's a well-oiled machine and there's none of this favoritism, there's none of that, the racism, there's none of the I'm not being heard, I'm not being seen, right? If you think about it, those companies allow those employees, those leaders to bring their table to their seats. And so what it made me think about though was there's an individual I was talking to, and he said he was working with or he was recruiting at least an executive, and he said he comes over to that company, and he says I was able to build my own thing at that own company without them even knowing it. And so I said, what do you mean by that? And so then he begins to proceed to tell me that $45 million were diverted because of what he was trying to do and where his heart was, right? Where check your heart, where your heart was. He diverted $45 million from this like frivolous spending, from these things that they didn't even account for, to being able to help underserved communities. And so I was like, oh, whoa, that's a whole lot of money, right? To be able to just divert. And he said, honestly, until it actually started happening, and then months down the line, that's when they finally noticed, oh, whatever happened to this one thing, whatever happened to that thing. And then once he brought his own table to the seat that he already had, because now what does that mean? I'm serving my vision, right? I'm serving the things that I want to do, and it's not in a bad way. I'm making your company look good, because once people gonna catch wind of, man, you dropped how much money into underprivileged communities. How powerful is that, right? So I think as y'all were talking through, kind of who's being hired here, who's being put into positions here, these people get fired, and then we just so happen to replace them with the same person, or we just so happen to, you got your, let's be honest, it's a token, right? And so you put Shaq in a certain position because it's like, no, we're not racist. We don't have biases. I put so and so in this position, and that person has some melanin in their skin, right? So that, I don't want to skip over that. So I want y'all to talk to me about when you're working with a company, when you're inside of a company, when you're leading, how do you effectively allow your people to bring their table to the seat that you held open for them?
Oh, that's a good question. And most organizations, once you determine their values, their goals, their mission statement, then they have to really live and breathe that. I think that we have gotten into or become a society where the mission statement and the goal is, or the values is just another check. Does your company have mission statement?
Mhm.
Check. But who's embodying that? Are we really giving our leadership and our middle managers or line managers the ability to bring those tables to those seats? Not really. And that's where a major disconnect happens. You got leadership, C-suite executives that, oh yeah, we check the box, but we're not really enforcing or pushing that. And so that's where the equity, that's where the inclusion falls short, because of course we got a diverse workforce. There's no harassment, there are no, there's no racism in our company. Look at all these great people that work here for us. But the control still stays at the top, and it still stays in one look. And not that we are against anybody, everybody's equal. We want to bring that equality to the table. If you have great people at the bottom, don't you think those great people have something to add to the top? So, to answer your question, how do we get that? I start with the C suite. Start embodying and really meaning your core values. If you don't mean it, then it's hard to push it through middle management, and you definitely won't get the buy-in from the employees. They'll know it's just another checkbox for them.
Yeah, and I love that you highlighted it is a checkbox. Like when they think about creating your business plan, you already know mission and vision. I had an interview this past week. It's like certain questions that that most interviews are going to ask you: what's your strengths and your weaknesses? What kind of leader are you? There are things that you just recognize that you see over and over again. So it becomes a checkbox. But what's missing is that companies aren't necessarily thinking about it from like, we really need to look at when we say mission and vision, we really need to think about evolving. Is it time to change that? Because we're one of the trainings that I give right now, I call it the future is diverse, because the reality is that is what the demand. I mean, people are demanding more diversity, more inclusion, and they're saying this, they're demanding diversity, but what they're really demanding is more equity, more seats at the table, or more tables at seats, right? They're looking for that. And I think what companies might fail at is they'll tend to remedy a situation by maybe financial means. Let's throw some more money at them. Let's just hire one person and they can fix all of the problems. Or like even Corey said, what's that one Black person that's at the organization? Or what's that one woman? Because the other area is there are a lot of women that are missing at a lot of these decision-making spaces. Let's throw a woman in there. Who's the woman in the company that's been just so great? But that's not the fix. You might get one person at the seat. You might get two people at the seat. But again, what's going to make sure that this continues, where you see a room at the C-suite level that is more diverse, where we see that something that is going to be a part of the vision, the future casting. And now what objectives are we going to take to do that? But the future is demanding more inclusion and equity. And if you want to be an industry leader, if you want to be the person that is consistently pressing forward, you have to embed this. And that's why a lot of companies have come out with statements, because they recognize there are certain populations where their dollar means a lot. It's going to really help them boost revenue. So they're going to put out the statements out there. But again, if internally you're not embodying the same stuff you're saying externally, it's going to come out. We're living in an age where an individual can post something on social media and it could really shut down your company. Who would have ever thought, like I mentioned again, I mean, Ellen, one of my favorite shows, but who would have ever thought that one person that decided to do one message, or two people who decided to go public about this, literally shook up an entire organization, even to the core of the company that's over them. It shook everything up. Now we're talking about let's take it even deeper. Does Ellen really have a say? Because essentially Warner Media came in, did the investigation. They were the ones in control of identifying what the issue was. So even she had a say, and she had to really respond to someone else above her to say, okay, this is what's going on. So essentially, we have to really make sure that we are consistently becoming innovative, not just from processes and looking at, how we're going to be able to push more new products and services, but also being innovative in the clients and the needs of the future. And again, there is a demand that there are more inclusive and equitable spaces. And if you aren't adhering to that or making the changes to be more of an inclusive and equitable organization, you will find yourself no longer being that industry leaders, because people are going to your websites. They're Googling you. They're seeing if you're putting your mouth and your money, they're making sure all that stuff is aligned. And if not, they will not come to your company, and that will affect your revenue, your productivity, and the individuals that are there internally will not feel like they belong. So just like Tyra said, it's really going to be an institutional change, and making sure that it's a part of the vision casting, and making sure that in regards to your objectives and your strategic planning, you are consistently taking actions to ensure that your company is developing the right kind of leaders so they can understand how to lead their diverse teams, and also creating processes so when people come in, they feel safe, they feel included, and they feel like they have an opportunity to get to the top.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And so that's the point that I want to bring up, right? So it's like, everything that we're talking about is like, are you putting your money where your mouth is? Are you really putting your action where your mouth said, or where nowadays, because of COVID or whatnot, where your keyboard was? So, are we putting those things in place to say we truly believe in this? Are you checkboxing it? So I want those of you listening to this to really think about, either are you in a position where people just keep talking and people are just talk all day, but you're not seeing the action behind it. And on the flip side of that, if you're in a position to be able to facilitate these types of things, are you the person just doing the talking? Right? Because there's a lot of times where you're in a position and you're in the thick of it and you're trying to do business and you're worried about these metrics and hitting these budgets and all these other things, you're lost in the weeds and you don't understand what's going on. And now y'all know one of my favorite phrases: you done muddy the waters, and you can't see through the water because you're trying to do all this other stuff, and in the midst of that, you got somebody at the bottom drowning, but you can't see them. So one of the things that came to mind as y'all were talking though was, so you talked about how Ellen might have somebody that she has to report to.
Mhm.
Let's talk about, as on a certain scale, right? Just to be honest, on a certain scale, yes, she's a female, she's a Caucasian female, but she also came out and said that, you know what, this is my sexual preference, right? So, and she's all for the LGBTQ community. Do you think that even plays a part into something, saying, and even still, the way that Ellen carries herself isn't in the most, girly way or whatnot. So you can still see her in the light of, okay, is she still considered a type of Caucasian male? Is she still considered, or does the fact that she is a woman just play the part of, okay, well, she still is a woman, right? Do you think that plays a factor into anything? Do you think that has a bearing on anything? I'm interested to see it as far as that goes.
But we know that. Oh, I'm sorry, Tyra.
Oh,
You want to say
go
something?
ahead. Go.
No, and I was going to say
She
that
was hot,
we're certainly
ready.
aware that no, because when, again, first thing also, when we're thinking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, we know that the house that's burning down right now is on the aspect of what's happening in the African American community. It's really in a racial aspect or ethnicity aspect. But when we think about the big scope of diversity, we're also considering the other aspects of gender. We already know women in the workforce is something that's lacking as well. There's a huge pay gap. I mean, this is stuff that has been identified as well. And, what you're saying is true, is that, although Ellen is someone that, I guess maybe like broke down the glass door or went past or went beyond that, because she is someone that has identified, outside of just being someone that's heterosexual, that is, huge. And she's at this high pivotal point where she's an executive. That is a big deal. So yeah, but in certain spaces, even if someone makes the room or enters the room or has a seat at the table, they might still be treated a different way, because they might say, well, you're still a woman, or they might say, oh, you're still this, or they might still look at you within whatever minority box that they have, and you might still not have as much say. And even again, Warner Media is overseeing the all these other different shows and other organizations that are underneath of them, and they pretty much are identifying or creating the pulse of what's going to happen below them. But it is true, it is a fact that even though you might make the seat, you might actually be in the decision-making room. Does your voice really matter? Is it really shifting or really driving change, where you can see more diversity if it's tied to your sexual preference, or see more diversity if it's tied to your ethnicity or background, or because of your gender? But that is another area that is lacking, because there are certain biases that people see when they see women. There are certain biases and things that women feel like they need to do in order for them to get into these rooms. I mean, I've been guilty in the past, like, man, we got too much estrogen in the room. We need to have a male leader. I've been even biased within the gender that I'm in, something that I had to recognize years ago. So I think that even if you have a seat at the table, we have to make sure that, again, whoever's at the head of the table, whoever, who the executives they choose, that is something that they're asking in their line of questioning when they're interviewing. Are they asking, again, another thing that some organizations have embedded is even in their yearly assessments and their performance reviews, they have embedded a question in there. What have you done to improve or aid in the diversity, inclusion, and equity measures that we have really pushed within the company. They ask that in the performance review. So that is something that people are having to show that we've done. Hey, if you look at my past 6 evals, you're seeing that I have been about this DEI life. Okay, so what are you doing even in your hiring your executives, and are you asking those line of questions of how they feel about it? If you're hiring a new CEO, have you asked those questions? Because again, the future is diverse. This is a demand. This is a need. This is a want. This is what's going to make you stand out. This is going to make you an industry leader. So if you're hiring people and they're not about that DE and I life, then essentially that could affect the makeup of your organization. So, and then also, once the person does have a seat at the table that is from a diverse background, and it is somebody that's like shaking up the mold that has been the makeup of your executive team, essentially, are their voice really heard? Is it valued? Or do you still even have biases when you see them externally versus understanding the person internally and what they can bring to the table?
I think that's really good. And I like that you highlighted the fact of the explicit, but there's also implicit bias that we may not just be aware of. And even I think when you're sitting at that head of the table, where you come from, your background, your makeup, all of those things in a totality create those biases. And one is awareness. So now that, like Aisha mentioned, you have to bring awareness to that through these assessments, through these questions, through these constant reminders of how do you feel about this person or that person and why? Is it something that is a factor point in their background, their life, something that happened to them? A lot of people carry things around with them personally that show up in the business world. So taking those assessments, listening, understanding, gaining awareness will really open our eyes up to, are there implicit biases that we just don't know? And I know I've been in a situation where I've been around different groups of people and I'm like, yeah, I don't really trust them. And it comes from background, comes from history, comes from, you don't really trust these people to do this. And all the things that we hear, the stereotypes. So in order to continue to change that, Corey, to your question, I just wondered, I still go back to what seat does she really have at the table? She is beneath the producer and the distributor of her show. She has her show, but how much power does she have? She may control her narrative, her guest, her things, but it still has to go up to, hey, we're going to either approve it or disprove it. It's really on them. And my other question that I began to think to her benefit was, these things came out about her show. We have seen these things come out about other people and their shows immediately got canceled. Why do you guys think, and if you have an opinion on, why is her show still standing?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you think about it, when they did the investigation, was there systemic racism, was systematic, whatever they want to call it, right? Racism involved. They said that, well, we didn't find anything, right? And so the thing for me is my mind immediately goes to, again, are people being heard? And so as y'all were talking, something came to mind, and I ran across this a lot of times with individuals. Number one, women in leadership aren't going, and it's not changing. It's not going anywhere. If anything, it's just going to continue to grow, because I do feel like there's still a lack of presence from women in leadership positions. But here's the thing, and an individual told me this the other day, and they said, you know what, I'm glad that I have a male supervisor. I said, well, what's the reason for that? Because I just work better with males, because they're more direct and I don't hear the mess and all this other stuff, right? And so then I started to dive down and I said, well, what mess is it, right? What is it? What is it about that individual? Is it the individual, or is it that you're now lumping all women in leadership into that spot, right? And so what I'm thinking about with even with Ellen, for example, is it that, like you said, is it that her seat at the table isn't high enough, or is it that maybe her actions, her or their unconscious bias as the line level employee is saying, well, I have to technically report to this woman. Well, I don't really think she's as good as the male, for example. I don't necessarily believe that. And I think it all ties back into are you developing your leaders, right? Are you developing your leadership skills? If somebody's messy, they're just messy. It doesn't matter, male or female. They're gonna spread the mess, right? If somebody is too direct or if somebody's very emotional, it doesn't matter, male or female, right? But I think that there are these unconscious biases that happen that all of a sudden you're like, well, if I got a female manager, if I have a female supervisor, if I got a female team lead, whatever it is, right? Oh man, I know they're messy or they're trying to spread rumors and stuff like. It's not about that. So then from the company standpoint, can you step back and say, am I developing my leaders into a position to say it, don't focus on the gender of the individual or the culture or the whatever, right? Because we've heard some cultural biases too, right? I can't have somebody from this culture because they're a little too direct.
Mhm.
I can't have somebody from this because, they're a little too passive or something like that, right? Like, it's not about that. Leadership principles can be holistically brought throughout, right? And so that's something that I thought about. And let me get y'all take on this too when it comes to, do you think that it really matters, the gender, the role of the person or whatnot, versus are you developing your people correctly? Because again, why is it that a entry level employee is telling me, I'm glad that I have a male supervisor versus I have a woman supervisor? I would think that you can connect more with a woman, with a woman. I would think that y'all, have a closer bond necessarily because y'all kind of go through the same things day to day, right? Like, relatively, it's kind of hard for me to say, oh, I know what it's like to be a woman. I've never been there before. So what's your take on that? I mean, is it a lack of training? Is it a lack of, and 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 when it comes to Ellen, do you think that that could be an issue that got brought up because simply she's a woman?
I love that. I love that. That had me thinking because that's so true. So I've run into those situations. If you haven't taken the assessment, you need to link up with us. I'm going to take the assessment. But of course, we have these psychometric tools. And I am a direct leader. I'm direct and I'm also very systematic. I'm about the process. I'm about the let's make sure these T's are crossed. Let's make sure the I's are dotted. I'm very systematic. And I remember at one time when I was being told how I was described to someone, and I was told like, yeah, we told them that you're really direct. So, really just be cautious about it. And I found myself getting complaints about my directness, where you will be in a room with these leaders at the C-suite executives. Again, it tended to be white male. And of course, I'm in the United States Air Force, if, many of you don't know, in the military. And that's one of the areas that they're addressing right now, biases and racial discrimination and why certain people are having opportunities or being reprimanded versus, these other individuals. But anyway, I'll be in meetings and I'll see individuals, males, and they'll be giving them that same energy, like direct. Why do we have this slide? Like, no, let's not do that. Like, they're really just direct with it. And it's interesting that I got that same feedback, which turned into a complaint when you believe or you feel differently when it's coming from someone from the male population. So I think that's a great point, because I think one of the things is that someone told her that they couldn't look her in the eye or they couldn't approach her or something like that. And she mentioned she was an introvert. And a lot of times, again, we don't get to know, because we know, again, from the assessments, you have individuals who are introverts. So from the external means, I might show up with all this energy and I can be on a show and I can laugh and be interactive, but really I'm an introvert by heart. I like to kind of lay back. So when I am at an event, I tend to be extremely quiet. I tend to just look around and I'm really have an anxiety type of moment. And a lot of people take it as I'm stuck up, I'm rude, just because really deep down inside, I'm an introvert and I'm super uncomfortable with people interaction. But they make assumptions because of our biases. Again, a lot of it's what we're talking about now is all bias, and how a lot of things come from our first teachers, our families, our parents, or
Mhm.
media, or the things that we're seeing and experiencing in society. Even the workout that I do this workout right now. Me and Corey was talking about that earlier. I can't think of the name of the instructor, but it's called The Work, right? And I see when the women are going hard, he uses that as a way to push the males. Like, man, all the women that come here push hard, and
Mhm.
man, y'all are just go hard. Y'all need to catch up with the women. But why is that the motivational aspect for you to drive the output of the men, right? Because society has, identified that, or believe that women might be weak or they can't push as hard. And he's just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you. And it's like, But the good thing on the other side of it is now it might also help those biases, because everybody doing this workout has seen that every single woman on these shows or these episodes or these rounds have kicked butt so much that this weakness that women have is not a fact. So it's like a benefit on one side, because I think it's always good to have a different diverse spaces and have that inclusion at the C-suite level, because it's also allowing those biases that you once had to be dispelled. These are no longer things that you're like, oh, well, all Black people aren't ghetto, because Keisha's with here in his executive team, and Keisha is just like, she doesn't have any kids outside of wedlock. Oh my gosh, you don't have any kids, Keisha? You don't have 2 baby daddies? Like all those different things, I think is, and I know I'm being silly right now, but the benefit of having inclusive and equitable spaces is now those biases that drive you, that society has embedded in you, sometimes our families have embedded in us, is now being dispelled, because now you're working next to someone that you believe that has a bunch of kids, or someone you believe can't drive, or someone you believe, got locked up at some point in their life. You're starting to unlearn a lot of those things. So I think that's the benefit of being in diverse rooms, is because now you're learning about people, and now hopefully you can carry that education now into your communities. And you can say like, oh, I work with, a bunch of, like, 2 of my executives are African-American and they're great. Like, I don't have to clutch my bag anymore when I walk by them. Some places you do, and that's regardless if they're African-American or not. And like I said, I'm throwing jokes out there, but this is the stereotypes that are out there. And before we go to you, Tyrus, I don't want to say not to go to you, but Corey talked about this exercise that he did for an inclusion and equity training he did. And he asked them, okay, when you hear this name or hear these, a Black woman, Black man, Asian American, or whatever, what are the things that pop in your head right away? And the things that he unlocked that he heard from there was like, those are stereotypes that you hear all the time. So right. Corey, can you touch on that real quick? And then go to Tyrus, because I think it's important that we have to recognize how many things that we have to unlearn, that we are being fed through media, we're being fed by our friends, family members, that we don't even realize are so unconsciously ingrained in us that it's affecting our behaviors. And now it turns into discriminatory behavior, because we are not giving people opportunities and shots because of these assumptions that we have, versus looking at more of the deeper lens of that individual. So let's talk about that. Talk about that exercise, Corey.
Man. So look, if you haven't been through it, we got to go through this, right? And so I'll give you a glimpse of it. So basically what I did, I uncovered it all, right? So I got to the nitty gritty, and it made some people uncomfortable. But at the end of it, it was like the weight was lifted. And so here was the thing. So we threw out terms like Black male, Black woman, just woman, white woman, Asian woman, Asian person, Asian male, right? And some of the terms that we got were just, it's quite honestly, I was like, this is how you think? I'm not judging you, but come on now. So we throw out the term Black male. And some of the terms that I heard to describe the Black male was thug, ghetto, jail time. I was like, I don't know how you synonymously think that somebody, because they are Black male, is jail. Lazy, improper speech. We shifted it to Black woman, right? So y'all bear with me. This is funny. So it was weave, it was broke, it was single mother, and my favorite term, although this is absolutely hilarious, roaches. And so I asked the individual who said that, I said, wait, so Black women, they just carry like a Ziploc bag of roaches or something, like they just got a little baggie of roaches on there? And they were like, no, I'm thinking about, like, when typically like a Black woman, they're single mothers, so they don't have the means to be able to take care. And we went down a rabbit hole, and I was like, and you could see their peers in the room were like, wait, what? But it was good to be able to get that out, because it's like, if that's something that you're thinking, and this is something that's on your mind subconsciously, and as she spit it out, she felt like, she was like, oh man, I feel terrible for saying this, but it's a thought that I had. And it's okay to let that thought out as long as you fix it. So anyway, at a certain point, I guess there's just Black women walking around with bags of roaches somewhere out there in their purse. So if that's you, then I don't know what to tell you. But even other biases, right? So we talked about, Middle Eastern culture, right? I talked about Islamic man, and they were like bombers, terrorists. Somebody said that they smell bad, that type of stuff. And I was like, how did we get here? Right? We talked about like Asian, like I just talked about Asian person in general, and they were like bad driver, very good at math, smart. And so like all of a sudden you got biases on the flip side that aren't necessarily all negative. And it's just for some reason, I guess all Asian people are great at math. I guess all Asian people are smart. All Asian people, and one of the other terms that they use was enterprising. And I was like, well, how are just all Asian people enterprising? So you kind of uncover those biases that these people have. That on the flip side is kind of funny, but on the other side, you can tell. Well, what if that Asian man walked into a room? You give him a different level of respect because unconsciously you're thinking he's smart, he's enterprising, he can do really good at math, he knows numbers, he has his stuff together. And it's like, are we literally walking and looking at people in a room when they come in the room like that, and then we're automatically defeating them? I tell people all the time, some of the nicest people that I know in life have gold grills in their mouth. And it's just that at a certain point in time in life, that's what they wanted to do. And they thought it was cool and they thought it was fly and now it's permanent. But that doesn't make them a thug. It doesn't make them less than. It doesn't make them a bad person. Yeah, I guess they just brush their teeth a little bit differently than I do in the morning. But they are genuinely nice people. You think about even biases as far as tattoos go. You want to talk about generation?
Mm-hmm.
Think about this, right? Think about if you go up to a baby boomer and you got tattoos all down your arms, what are they going to look at you as? Versus you go to a Gen Z or you go to a millennial with tattoos, to us are like, sure, you got them. That's cool. Tattoos used to mean that you were hard back in the day. Tattoos used to mean that you were a thug, or you might have been part of a biker gang, or you might have done some different stuff, right? Even teardrops in eyes, right? You see people that back in the day, if you had a teardrop, that means you killed someone. That means you had, or as they call it, you got a body on you, right? So you look at people now, they just got teardrops just because it looks cool. And it's a completely different look than it was back then in the day. And we have to get ourselves out of these. Ultimately, it was a great group because after that, they were like, wow, I didn't realize that I thought like that. And when it just started flowing, that's what just started coming out of my head. But that's the safe space to be able to do it, right? Because we don't want your employees, we don't want you just in general walking out in public with these unconscious biases that you're looking at people just thinking that, oh, because that's a black woman, she's a single mother, right? I had an individual talk to me the other day that said she was at work and they were talking about something about the police, and someone turned around, and it had nothing to do with like all the stuff that's going on with the police right now. It simply was something about the police force in the area, and one of her teammates said, "Oh, you've never been arrested?" And she was like, "What? Like, why did you just think that I get arrested? Like, why did you just think?" Because she was like an older black lady. Why do you just think that I've been to jail? Like, I've been arrested before? Like, is it far fetched that I've never been arrested before? And so those are the types of things where it's like you might not even realize it until you're put in that scenario or you're put in that situation. Honestly, if you think about it, these are people who will one day be in these C-suite positions, that are in these leadership positions, that are in these high-level management positions. You run a company, you open a business, and if you're unconsciously looking at people like this, you got an uphill battle to fight because you might be hindering your actual business because this is what you're going through. Yeah, when I say you're pulling out these bags of roaches, look. If I see somebody with it, y'all stop me.
Oh, that's interesting. To what I think, and just listening to that training, that workshop that you did, Corey, is very helpful. And I don't think companies actually do it. Here's what I see. I see it. We're putting out fires. We have all these things going on. There's no one is being proactive. We don't hear about or see diversity and inclusion because I didn't really see it. And I've been in the Fortune 500 companies and I've been in there, and that's not discussed. But soon as something happens, now we want to do these workshops for 6 months, bring some people in, make sure we get everything to smooth it over and then move on. And I think conducting workshops like yours will create and be a proactive plan or approach, and that way it's not always about putting out fires. And to your point, what would you do? There's a show that comes on. They talked about bias recently. They had people sitting in a restaurant over here, then John comes out and say, hey, it was just actors, they're all actors. But what they really showed is what people really think. A black guy, he's athletic, gotta be in sports. And we have embedded that so much to where, what do you want to be, a football player or a basketball player? Like, is that all the options? Why can't I be other things? So having those difficult conversations, true conversations with people that don't look like you, will help you uncover those unconscious biases that maybe you may not even be meaning to be mean or be bad or be ugly or be whatever. But it's still, if I say, oh man, Middle Eastern people or Indians, or they're gonna talk you down, they're gonna haggle you. Well, that's a part of the culture over there in their country. They haggle. Here we don't haggle as much, so it comes off as a negative connotation. And now every time you see that person, oh man, he's gonna haggle me. And so we just want to begin to talk about and have these conversations proactively. I don't know how many times I've heard from the most well-meaning people that I know that, oh, if you see a Hispanic person, they work hard, but they're probably not legal. How do you know that? Where did you get that information from? And then there was also research and study done that, and I think we may have mentioned it last week, where employers or hiring managers, they look at certain names and they just push those applications to the side based off the name. I got a good friend of mine. He got a Hispanic last name, white as can be. And I'm thinking, how many times has his application been pushed to the side before they even saw him, just based on biases and things that they think? And that was really an eye opener for me to understand that, man, people can think all different types of things, even when they're well meaning, and don't know that they're just hurting themselves. And now, I'm gonna throw it back to Aisha, but before we end this, I do want to go over some impacts that diversity and inclusion will have for your company in a positive way if you start to implement these things. And I hit those stats towards the end, but I should take it over.
Yeah, I mean, and I love what you guys have highlighted. I mean, just to go over, I know you have some stats, but I've been talking about the future is diverse. It says minorities are expected to make up 30% of the workforce by 2020. Even if you look at diversity in regards to the generational differences, we are now living in the time where the workspace is the most diverse in regards to generations. So you have the baby boomers working with the millennials working with the Gen Z. You have Gen Z working with Gen X. So you have so many different layers within your organizations that we have to start looking at people different than what we see on the surface. Like when you had mentioned something earlier, even if you, like, for instance, I'm a single woman and I'm an African American, but we never take time to find out the why and find out what happened. Nah, I wasn't a baby daddy. I was married. It was another, it wasn't outside of wedlock. And if it was, so what? A lot of us aren't taking time to identify the why and the story behind what made that individual, and recognizing that each person that you interact with, it's an individual story. There's an individual layers to that person that we need to identify versus boxing people into these groups. And we're all guilty of it. We all have different biases. Again, it might be gender based. It might be related to race. It might be related to sexual orientation. It might be related to faith. There's so many different biases that we have from things, again, we have learned from home, maybe in our communities and the friends that we're around, and we have to check them and recognize that there's a story behind each individual resume you see. There's a story behind that, and there's some talents behind that, some strengths and certifications that you are going to miss out on, and versus you're going to hire this person because you assume that they know math and you assume that they're just a great leader from these biases. But now you've hired someone on the staff that's going to be an ineffective leader, that's not going to be able to show up effectively for your team. And now it's affecting productivity, retention. Now it's affecting the culture and the climate of your organization. So there's an individual story behind each resume and person that you're hiring. You need to just take time and learn that and understand that and work on that little by little. And if you start to do that and saying, hey, a name, literally a name can make you draw all kinds of pictures and ideas. I remember I was this job that I have now when I first applied for it, and one of the people last name had a Hispanic last name. I assumed it was going to be a Hispanic woman. So then I'm very visual. So I tend to create a picture of what a person looks like, literally from their name or just from some basic information that I have. And I met her totally different. So what kind of stories are we creating in our minds from a name, from a skin color, from a gender, from a sexual orientation that now is keeping you from learning the story behind the person that can literally come in, become so innovative that your company now goes from 0 to 60 real quick. All right. Shout out to, is it Drake? Is it Drake? 0 to 60 real quick, right? So what are you doing to make sure you're getting the story behind the person? And I think the more that we do that and we have these conversations, create those new employee orientations or those leadership development programs in your organizations where you can have someone learning this information from the beginning. So now this is embedded in their mind where they're walking and they're moving around within your organizations and leading their teams. They always have that in the back of their mind that I must now look at the story behind each individual person versus boxing them in just because of the biases that I have within me. It's really unlearning that. And again, learning the story behind the person to really make sure that you are hiring the right personnel, connecting even with your clients, because there are certain clients that you aren't even connecting with as an organization because you have a bias. Mm-hmm. You assume this person isn't going to buy. But they might just wear that same outfit every week. And you might think it's the same outfit, it's clean, but they might really be a millionaire and they're just very frugal. You might assume this person can't afford your services, but they can. They are very wealthy, or they're very, they have everything that fits in the qualifications, but you're having all these assumptions because of the fact that they look a certain way. So we need to take more time as companies, organizations, as leaders to look at the person behind that, the story behind that person, to truly make the right type of decisions to really help our businesses move forward, which again will benefit productivity, retention, and make you that industry leader that essentially means dollar bills.
Absolutely. And I'll go into just a couple of the statistics behind it, just to piggyback, because it rolls right into what you were saying. It says diverse companies enjoy 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee. So not only do they see a significant cash flow overall, they see it by the individual contributor in the company. Diverse management boosts revenue by 19%. So those companies with diverse management teams, they enjoyed a 19% increase in revenue compared to their less diverse counterparts. 43% of companies with diverse boards noticed higher profits. Not only is it beneficial to have diverse employees and management, but companies with diverse boards also noted significantly higher profits. And I think that's where I start to think about, really, it's great to have diverse employees, diverse managers, some diverse leadership. Who's sitting at that board? Who is at that board table? Who is making the decision? Companies with highly gender diverse executive teams perform significantly better. To Corey's point, people may interact differently with different sexes, but just to say, well, I want to work with a man, why? That man may not be pushing you to be excellent or do what you need to do. And then companies, and last, I'll leave it at this one. Companies that are highly gender diverse notice exceptional value creation. So when we talk about creating value, bringing value to the table, bringing a different perspective, how can you get a different perspective if you got everybody that look like you, think like you, and do like you? There's no innovation in that. There's no creativity in that. That's just us working through the same process that's worked, and we're living in, or we have, the good old boy club. We got to get outside of that. We got to get outside and bring other individuals in that have those different perspectives that can bring different value based on their life experiences.
Yep. And
so before we close, I know you're about to close, Corey. Also, when we wrap it up, the question will be, because again, this all started with the Ellen DeGeneres show. Do you believe that it has an opportunity to rise, or will it continue to fall? Well, go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, no. So before I close this out, I just want people, especially those in positions and those who have businesses and a department or whatever it is to run. You got a team to run. Tyrus brought up something that said, what is your per customer transaction? I think it was a per employee transaction,
Yeah.
or profit, I should say.
Yep.
I want you to think about what's the customer transaction, right? So a lot of companies out here, every time you touch a customer, you want to make a certain amount of money from that customer, right? It's the nature of the beast, and we get it, right? So if you work in retail, if you sell a product, whatever it may be, how much money are you making every time you contact the customer, and are you letting it fall through? And so you made me think about a story when I used to work at Best Buy way long time ago, many moons while I was in college, right? And so there was an individual, and so I said, like, what if that person just doesn't want to dress up like that? So we're contacting customers, and a lot of my peers would say, "Oh man, I'm not talking to this person because they look a certain way. I'm not talking to this person because they don't look like they're going to buy anything, right?" And so I contacted an individual. He came into my zone, and I said, "Hey, how can I help you?" And he said, You're the first person that told me that you can help me thus far." And I was like, "Sure, I'm just doing my job." And that's all I thought I was. I thought I was just doing my job. And he said, "I got basketball shorts on right now. My shoes look beat up, and I got this plain blue t-shirt on." And he was with his wife, and his wife had like some cargo shorts on with a t-shirt on or whatever with her purse. And I don't think her purse was any like high name brand or anything. But when I talked to him, we figured out the solution that he needed, and he came in ready to buy. Like he was ready to buy some stuff. My man dropped $3,500 in the store. And so we had a good conversation about, what if I would have let that person walk out? What if he would have said, "I'm
Mhm.
not being helped and I'm going a different direction"? And because this bias happened and people looked at him and said, "Well, he doesn't look like he can buy anything. He's not dressed to look like he can buy anything." The per customer transaction in the store for that month so far was like $125 per customer that walked in the store. What is that? You're driving a business, right? What does that $3,000 for $3,500 from that one customer do for your per customer transaction? What does it do for your profit margin when they're buying certain things? What is it doing for your overall revenue? How's it spill back on down to whether you get a bonus, whether you can promote more people into different opportunities? How many people are you missing like this because you're allowing your bias to take control, and you're not contacting the person? You're talking to them a certain way, you're discrediting them a certain way. You want to talk about deeper than that, really? He not only spent $3,500, he whipped out a wad of money about this big and said, "I could pay for this for cash." But I told him, I said, "Hey, guess what? Why not? Why not just defer it for like 18 months, right? Instead of dropping all that money right now." I said, "You seem like a smart guy. Seems like you could do other things with that money, right?" So then I signed him up with a credit card for it. And yes, Best Buy, if y'all don't know, at a certain purchase, it's like 18 or 24 months free, no interest or whatever,
Mhm.
right? But that credit card means something different to that individual. If people attach to your company, if people get the credit card, if people get the reward member or whatever it is, right? The thing that signs up, they're attached. Guess where he's coming back to shop? Best Buy. Guess
Yeah.
where he's going back to spend more money? Best Buy. He has more buying power. Why? Because I get free interest now. Yeah, I got the money. That's fine. I don't have to drop it right now. But you make a customer for life simply by not having a bias towards it, simply because I said, "I also look like you, right? In the way that you dress, I like wearing basketball shorts. I like wearing t-shirts. I don't have to wear a suit all the time. I do like suits. I don't have to wear it all the time. And I walk in Best Buy myself with a t-shirt and some shoes. I might even wear some Crocs, and y'all don't judge me for wearing Crocs. But you know what I mean? Like, you created a customer that, how much money is that one customer going to generate you? So when he has to come back to your store, he has buying power. He feels connected to you. And because there was no bias, because I simply said, "I'm going to help you," how much money will your company now make from that person? How many people will that person tell them? So like, look, we talked about the rise and the fall, right? Like, that is how you rise, right? You get rid of the bias, you get rid of the thoughts in your head, right? You get rid of the things that you unconsciously look at somebody, but you gotta let it out. So right. So we want to wrap this up. Y'all got any final words?
I got one just a big piggyback off of you. Sales revenue increases 15-fold among companies with high racial diversity. And that proves the point to show that when you have different people of different backgrounds, you can build connection with others that you might not have that connection with. Another person, like you said, looking at a person with basketball shorts on, "Well, I don't play basketball, I wear khakis or do whatever." Just because you had that connection, you were able to go and serve that customer. So 15-fold among companies with high racial diversity. And then for me to end my piece, I think that when we think about rise and fall, we see some companies fall because of this diversity and inclusion. There's something happens, they're snatched from the show, they go and they just kind of disappear, so to speak, for a little while. I think that as far as Ellen's show, I believe that she will rise from this. And I believe that because even if I don't know all the pieces, even if I don't know how the table has shifted or changed at the top, I do know that they launched the investigation. No systemic or systematic racism was filed. They established a dedicated HR representative for the show. So for specifically, now the show has an HR representative. Hotline for any kind of complaints. They did add DJ Stephen Twitch Boss as a co-executive producer. So they have made some changes. They actually did something. They stopped filming for a while just so they can get their ducks in a row, get their pieces together, and now we're going to bring it back. I'm sure that when they also said everyone on staff, including Ellen, will participate in the diversity and inclusion workshops. So when they bring this back, they're going to have that discussion, and then they're going to rise and they're going to get better from this. They're going to make sure they correct it. Other people, like when I think about what was his name, Matt Lauer from the Good Morning America show, gone, not coming back. He finished. Deuces. There was no training. There was nothing around that. My question, why? I don't know. Why didn't they see something different or move something different? I can only think that maybe what he did and what was found to be done, they just didn't agree with it. And what Ellen actually went through a process, they got rid of 3 of their execs, and those are the people who were, rumored to have done these things. So she'll come back. I think that she gets that rise from me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the rise is definitely there, but just as a reminder for a lot of organizations, businesses out there, when you do make these decisions to make these shifts, it's going to be important that you create a maintenance plan, because yes, you fired individuals, you've included training, you've created new processes, but making sure it's maintained is going to be key. And because people are going to be watching, your employees that decide to stay are going to be watching. They're going to really see if you're going to consistently make this a process. So if you do run into another situation where another executive might do something inappropriate, what is your accountability measures? Is that something that you're going to be firm with? Because a lot of times we will be so in love with someone's talent and what gifts they bring to the table, but not recognizing that you can either fall in the villain side of your talent or on the side where you're the hero. And there are some people, unfortunately, who have gifts and talents that we've seen all around. But unfortunately, that gifts and talent has now turned into a villainized part. And now they're using that to persuade people to do things inappropriately, or they're trying to use that to really exude this level of power that turns into inappropriate behavior on our workplace climates that are ineffective. So it's going to be so important that your accountability measures and what you're doing to maintain this as a normal practice is going to be so important. And again, I believe 100% that Ellen will rise from this, but that consistent aspect of maintaining and creating this process. So this, I won't say it won't ever happen again, but at least you have a hold of it because you have shifted the culture. You have changed that institutional bias. You have done your part, even to the top, to Warner Media, where this no longer becomes acceptable within that organization and people come in knowing that. So again, maintenance. Talk about it, make the changes. It might be reactive now, but now it's to maintain that level of proactiveness so this doesn't happen again.
That's good. That's good.
Yep. And so I'm on the same page. I say strong rise for Ellen's group, right? A strong rise, because I feel like based on her personality, what she exudes, people mess up. And the thing in business is you just got to give me a chance to fix it, right? So I think strong rise. I think they're actually going to make a positive impact based on what was brought up, and really show people, look, we've made these changes. So I say strong rise. I think they're going to use their platform to really show people what the positive side of change can look like, although there are allegations.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
that's it from me. I think we good, Corey. Take us out.
Yeah. So look, we appreciate y'all meeting with us again. So every Saturday, this is your Act and Lead Saturday leadership session, right? where we mess action with leadership. We're not just going to talk about theory with you, right? So this is act and lead. Look, and in the great words of Master P, you got to be body. We'll see you next week.
What? Have a good day, guys.